So today we're going to discuss what is the dark night of the soul? What is it and why do we experience it? And how is it different from just experiencing symptoms of, say, depression? If you clicked on this video, you have probably been on this process of spiritual awakening. So terms like dark night of the soul have started to come into your awareness. And so I wanted to make this video to discuss what exactly that is and why that process occurs and what you can kind of expect from this process. So to discuss Dark Night of the Soul, we have to first discuss what it means to awaken. So I personally think that most people who are beginning to awaken in consciousness right now on the planet were born into this incarnation with a certain level of spiritual awareness. So you were probably deeply intuitive as a child, maybe neurodivergent in some capacity, maybe highly artistic or creative, or just you felt different, like you didn't fit in some way. And I think that when you come into the earth as it is now, in this state of hypersensitivity, hyper awareness, and having these sort of gifts and ways of understanding and ways of seeing things that are not recognized by others around you, you learn how to suppress these things. So I think, we're lucky now that as children are being born to more conscious individuals, like the children that are coming onto the planet now, are being given more of a chance to kind of nurture those aspects of themselves instead of having to kind of shove them away or dim them down. But I think as adults, if you are part of this like wave of consciousness that is awakening now on the planet, you were probably born into karmic situations, situations that forced you to try to conform into them, which meant having to suppress your own intuitive wisdom, to suppress your light to fit in. So the process of awakening, depending on how deeply you suppress these aspects of yourself, the process of awakening is kind of returning. It's like a remembering of who you actually are. And this can come through near-death experiences. This can come through rock bottom experiences. And this can often come through relationships as catalysts. And I think that if you are specifically on the journey of awakening that is on the path of evolving the paradigm of relationships and how we relate, you will know that your relationships with others have always been defining. They've been non-ordinary. They've been massive catalysts for growth and change in your life. And so you'll know if you're on that path, if that is your path to awakening, like you will know that's it, and you will have experienced these deep catalysts within relationships to others, and your relationships with others will always kind of feel soul aligned, whether it's karmic relationships that are playing out, or it's soulmates along your path, or if you are on the twin flame journey, then you will have experienced certain catalysts and things that have led you along that journey. So whatever path to awakening that you're on, you start to have these experiences that awaken you to your consciousness and to your intuition, to your higher self. And so when this first starts to happen, I think the first level of this is that you start to really become aware of yourself. And when you become aware of yourself, sometimes this can be a really uncomfortable process, right? Because you're being forced to look at and see aspects of yourself that maybe you've been running from and suppressing and, pushing away for a really long time. And what sort of tends to happen here as you're awakening into this is that your coping mechanisms, the patterns that you have fallen back on throughout most of your life to cope with these things, they no longer work for you, or they're no longer available for you. And so I think this aspect of the healing process is very non-linear, right? So we kind of like come up against these confronting moments and feelings and things that are coming up for us, and we're seeing these things in a different way. And oftentimes you try to go back to the familiar, back to what's comfortable, but you no longer fit into those spaces because your consciousness has expanded, because you are more aware of yourself. You can no longer fit back into spaces that are too small for you. And so this period of time in the awakening process can feel very tumultuous. It can feel very ungrounded. It can feel like a lot of tower moments, a lot of relationships that at one point felt very necessary and very bonded. They start to crumble. Your entire life purpose might change. This is where you may feel called to step into more of a purpose-driven career and a career of service, or just your life changes in a sense, even if it's like that you thought you were going in one direction and suddenly you're going in another, and it feels like you are being forced to surrender to what's happening in your life and let it unfold instead of trying to control it. And so this period of time can feel very tumultuous, very unstable, very unsettling, because it's like this great kind of like breaking down of what isn't actually really us, right? It's like all of these false things that we've clung to create this sense of comfort and identity within what was at one point familiar to us, and within our attempt to fit in and to survive in a world that was not made for us, that's not authentic to us and to our soul's journey. And so this whole part of the process, you can kind of go back and forth, like I said, trying to fit back into those old spaces, but you're starting to realize that those old coping mechanisms, they no longer serve. And I think this is when you start to seek out, or even information just finds you, and like this is like really a time of learning and expanding your knowledge and seeking out wisdom and learning different tools and ways of understanding what you're going through and holding space for what you're going through. And it can be really challenging, and this is why I mentioned at the beginning similarities to going through experiences like depression, because if you're on this journey, there's going to be periods of time where you are going to experience really deep and difficult emotions, where you are going to feel things like loneliness, and you are going to recognize the feeling of feeling misunderstood, or feeling like you don't belong in this world. You're in this world, but you're not of this world. Like these kinds of like deep emotions are surfacing. But the difference between what's happening as you're awakening versus just being in a depression is that as you are awakening, there's almost like this constant, even when it feels very faint and very dim, there's like this constant light at the end of the tunnel where you feel this cyclical nature of like, I'm in this really difficult moment, but then I'm growing from it and I'm moving forward from it. And I feel its purpose within the greater picture of my life. So it doesn't become this sort of hopelessness in a way, or seeking something outside of yourself to like try to rectify these feelings. It's like this feeling of just being deeply pulled inward. And I know that for some people, like I know a lot of people that are working on themselves and have gone through like this feeling of awakening and changing themselves and getting over dysfunctional ways of treating their bodies, dysfunctional ways of relating to others, all these things. But I do think that if you are a paradigm shifter, if you are like genuinely here to change the frequency of the planet, it's going to go, even though you want to be like, okay, I did that now, and now it's time for me to be normal again. And so you kind of like cling to that feeling of like, I've healed and I can now like be a normal person. But you're going to be taken deeper than that. And what I mean by that is that you're going to start to you're going to experience, and this is what I think is like the true dark night of the soul, is when you get put into a phase of deep isolation, because I don't think that this work can be done with distraction. And oftentimes that's what relationships with other people and like, you know, the things that we build in our lives around us, that's what they often become. And so if you are pulled into a deep, deep isolation, you start to unravel and go deep into healing things like childhood trauma. You know, because there's very surface level ways of kind of like checking that box of like, oh, I healed my inner child, like I love my, you know, but to really like go deep into that line of energy, like back through everything that you've experienced, and then to start to be able to transmute that energy from childhood, the things that you've gone through. And then you start to, from there, kind of go down the family lines of like understanding, you know, family karma and trauma, and, you know, how your ancestral lines and your family lines like have brought you into this moment now. And so you're like healing those energies, and you're healing these energies within yourself, and you're holding all of this energetic frequency, and you're, you know, going through past lives as well, like the past life energetic chords and things. And so it just, you're awakening to your spiritual gifts. So there has to be the space for that, right? And so this is the aspect of the dark night of the soul that is one of the most challenging things, is that the mind, basically what you're experiencing is an ego death in a lot of ways. And the mind has a really hard time understanding this, even though the soul understands and knows that everything is divinely following its order and its natural rhythm, and that you can just allow these processes to occur. The mind really, really, really struggles with this, because everything in our 3D reality is set up in a way where it's like you are supposed to be experiencing life in this certain way. And so when you are not, the ego and the mind fight you on that. And so going through this dark night of the soul is like allowing the soul to have its process and to trust that process, even though other people around you might not understand. Your mind consciously in the moment may not understand and may be struggling with that. But it's kind of like, we used to have to expand as a soul. We used to have to leave our bodies, leave our current incarnation, and be reborn in order to ascend as a soul. And what's happening now is that we're now able to ascend within this current incarnation. And this is an incredible thing, because when we go through this process of almost like a death to a rebirth, we're able to rebirth the soul without going through the whole process of the amnesia and the, you know, process of like being a child and not having sovereignty, and having to go through this whole learning and unlearning process again. And so we're going through this massive ego death, and that is really challenging. It's challenging to the ego self, and it's challenging to feel isolated and misunderstood by the people around you. And it's a lot of weight to carry. Like, you are, like I said, transmuting and clearing energy through generational lines, through family lines, from your entire experience in this incarnation, the energy that you hold from previous incarnations. Like, there's, you're clearing and transmuting and releasing the energetic cords that you hold to other people, because all throughout our lives we are constantly creating cords with other people. And part of the dark night of the soul, and part of the isolation, is learning to clear those and to call your energy back. And so through this process, this is again how this kind of differs from just being in a state of depression, is that you are working. It's somewhat thankless work, because the people around you and outside of you, they don't know what you're going through or what you're doing, but you're doing deep, deep, deep soul work. And it's not easy, and it can be really heavy, and it can feel really lonely, and it can feel really confusing. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to make this video, is because for me personally, over the years that I've been going through this, there's been maybe like one or two people that I've come across out on the internet who have made me feel less alone and less crazy, for what I was going through, just because they spoke my language and they shared their story and they understood the journey that I was on and that I was going through. And so that's why I do think it's important to share these things if you feel called to, because even if one person receives the message and it helps them, then that is what we're here to do, right? And there's so much noise out there too, especially within like the spiritual community. It's like these topics and these buzzwords and these ideas, they get used, they get thrown around by a lot of charlatans, for lack of a better word. And I think that a lot of these people are still playing in the 3D earth reality of like, how can I use language in any regard to manipulate and control and get something out of others? So that constant seeking of like, I'm doing this because I want something from it. And so part of this experience of going through something like a dark night of the soul and going into isolation and calling your energy back and learning to be sovereign and learning to stand on your own 2 feet is, even though it can be so hard and so deeply painful and deeply challenging, it's the growth that you see within yourself of your ability to stand strong, your ability to be a leader, to evolve your voice, to connect to your intuitive gifts, to learn to trust your intuition, to learn how to form loving boundaries, to learn how to discern what is real and what is not real, and what is for you and what is not for you. And the deeper you go into this work, the more all of you evolve into all of those skills. So the one other thing I wanted to touch on with the dark night of the soul is that it's not just the mind that goes through a challenging process as you go through this, it's also the body. And so it's interesting how desensitized we are to our bodies, and the way we're kind of taught to relate and inhabit our bodies. And going through this process, and even just what we're taught about time, and this like oppressiveness of like what we're capable of within a certain time frame, and like, as you start to go down this awakening journey and you go through this dark night of the soul process and you begin to know yourself so deeply, all of the kind of illusion that's projected onto us starts to fall away, and your body goes through these processes. So your body is like the vessel that is moving energy constantly through it, through, you know, it's like the channel through which we process our sensory experience of life, right? And so the body holds on to a lot of energy. Our body is matter, it's dense. And so the healing process and the process of going through this dark night of the soul can be really challenging on the body. And the body is going to show you where it's unwell. And the body is going to ask in different ways to heal. And you're going to have to hold space for that. And it's very different than the experience of the mind. And the thing is, the consciousness, the mind moves rapidly. That's energy, right? We're just processing energy. And so the mind and the ego wants things to happen in this like very quick way. And the body is constantly slowing us down and reminding us like we are physical, we are matter, we are here now. And so the experience that the body goes through and the body's healing process is much different. And one thing that I will say about that is that we've been taught that any type of feeling in the body is bad in some way. And that if you are feeling anything, any sort of irregularity, that means you have to run to the doctor and that you have to take a pill and you have to, there has to be a solution that, and often times these solutions are just a band-aid, right? And we're so afraid of like feeling in the body and I think through this process you have to learn how to trust your body, how to listen to your body. And so this is why it's really great as you're going through this process to hopefully find some type of practice that connects you deeply to your body, that gives you, and this is also too why isolation I think is so important, because it's like bringing all of your energy back into your body and letting your body restore and reheat and heal without holding anyone else's energetic frequency within your body. And once you do that, there may be discomfort, there may be things that come up and come through us. Can we allow those things and trust those things and listen to those things and listen to what they're teaching us without being afraid of them, right? And so I think that that's a really important part of this. And you start to see the longer that you're in this kind of dark night of the soul experience, which can last a long time. It can last for a while. No one said this process was going to be easy, right? But as you're in it, you start to hopefully gain the wisdom and release the burden, right? And so as we're purging, as we're shining awareness into these difficult dark spaces, we're bringing light into the darkness within us. We're purging, we're releasing, we're letting go. Every time we go through one of these difficult things, and I know for me personally, crying is probably my biggest form of emotional, physical release, like one of them. And I know when I have like a massive purge and a massive release of emotion and I can feel it moving through me and out of my body, it's horrible when you're in it in the moment. Sometimes it's really awful and painful, really, truly painful. But once I've moved through it, I know that I'm not going to have to go back there again. And that the only way to release these things is to move through them, to let them be felt, to let them be released, right? And transformed and transmuted. And so you start to come into the wisdom and the awareness that there's purpose behind what you're going through, right? And I think that's a really important takeaway, that like, even if you are in a lot of pain, even if you're suffering and it's hard and it's difficult, just know that you are gaining this incredible wisdom that is going to lead to such incredible growth for you. And so you kind of see what you're going through and the dark night of the soul as having purpose within this greater vision of you rising into your highest timeline and your highest self. And your highest vibrational self is going to be free from these heavier things that have kind of burdened us as we've gone along this path and this journey. So you're going through a process of preparation, and it can be really, really challenging, but there's a reason for it. And so you have to kind of hold on to that reason and walk in faith. Even in the most challenging moments, you just have to keep reminding yourself that you can trust yourself. Remind yourself of how capable you are of learning to hold space for yourself and learning how to take care of yourself through these difficult things. And as you continue to walk along the journey, you continue to learn how to stabilize your energy, how to move through these things quicker and easier and without judgment upon yourself. So if you are going through this, if this is a new process for you that you're just stepping into, or even if you've been dealing with this for a while, all I can say is really just continue to find practices that bring you peace, practices that help you to calm the waters and that bring you back to yourself, and continue to hold to the highest vision, continue to do your manifestation work around what that highest vision is and what you're calling in, and what your spiritual purpose is, what your spiritual gifts are, and how can you kind of cultivate those and build upon those and let those expand within you. And you're going to make it through, right? It's all going to be worth it. It is already worth it. You're already seeing the beauty that comes from doing this work, and the universe will continue to reflect that to you even through moments of challenge. That is what I will say, like through this kind of dark night of the soul period of time, even though inside of you you may be dealing with some really difficult and challenging things, it's still probably going to be a really beautiful time in your life, because things are going to start to align and things are going to start to feel more peaceful, and you're going to start to regulate your nervous system, and you're going to start to know what that feels like, to feel a sense of calm and safety and peace and presence within yourself. And to that may be something that maybe you have never experienced in your life up until now, and that takes your nervous system time to relearn how to exist in a peaceful, gentle, loving way. So you're kind of learning how to hold space for yourself in a way that maybe you never have before. So I think I'm going to leave that there. If you do have any comments or questions, please do say hi, and I will talk with you again soon.